My father lived in my house for 8 years without paying a cent, until I discovered he was supporting another family with my money. I bought my first house when I was 24 years old. Let me tell you, that fact still makes me proud, even after everything that happened. I worked 2 jobs for 3 years straight, saved every penny I could, skipped vacations, drove a car that was older than me, and ate more ramen than any human should consume in a lifetime. But I did it. The day I got those keys, I stood in the empty living room and cried like a baby. It was mine. All mine. The house hunting process had been brutal. I must have looked at 30 different places before I found this one. Most were either too expensive, too run down, or in neighborhoods that made me nervous. When I first walked into this house, I knew it was the one. It wasn't perfect. The carpet was ancient and stained. The kitchen cabinets were from the 70s. There was a weird water stain on the ceiling in the master bedroom that nobody could quite explain, but it had good bones. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard that was mostly weeds but had potential. And most importantly, I could afford it. The closing process took forever. There were inspections and appraisals and so much paperwork I thought my hand would fall off from signing things. The bank wanted to verify every aspect of my financial life. But on a Tuesday afternoon in March, I sat in a lawyer's office and signed my name about 100 times. And then someone handed me a set of keys. Just like that, I was a homeowner. My parents lived in this sad little apartment across town. The place was falling apart, literally. The landlord kept raising the rent, but wouldn't fix anything. My mom would call me sometimes, trying to sound cheerful, but I could hear the stress in her voice. The heater was broken. The ceiling in the bathroom was leaking. The neighbors were getting louder and more aggressive. My dad would get on the phone and tell me not to worry, that they were handling it. But I could hear the exhaustion there too. I'd visit them sometimes, and each time I did, the apartment looked worse. The carpet in the hallway had developed this smell that no amount of cleaning could remove. The paint was peeling in the corners. You could hear everything through the walls. My parents had lived there for almost 15 years, and in that time, it had transformed from modest to depressing. They'd always struggled with money. My dad worked construction, which meant some months were good and others were absolutely terrible. My mom did cleaning jobs here and there, whatever she could find. They'd given me everything they could when I was growing up, which honestly wasn't much, but it was love, and that counted for something. I remember being a kid and noticing how my parents' faces would change when bills came in the mail. The way they'd sit at the kitchen table late at night with a calculator and a pile of envelopes, their voices low and tense. I'd promised myself, even as a kid, that I wouldn't live like that. I'd get a good job, save money, have stability, and I'd done it. So when I bought my house, this 3-bedroom place with a decent yard and a garage that actually closed, I knew what I had to do. I invited them over for dinner about a week after I moved in. We sat in my new kitchen, which still smelled like paint, and I made spaghetti because that's basically all I knew how to cook back then. My mom kept touching the counters, running her fingers along the edges, and I could see tears in her eyes. My dad was quieter than usual, and looking back now, I can see he was already calculating. Already planning how to use this generous offer to his advantage. So, I said, pushing my plate away and trying to sound casual. I've been thinking, this place has 3 bedrooms, and I'm just one person. Your apartment situation sounds pretty rough. What if you guys moved in here for a while? Just temporarily, until you can save up and find something better. My mom's face lit up like I'd just handed her a winning lottery ticket. My dad looked relieved, but also uncomfortable in a way I couldn't quite read. We couldn't impose like that. This is your house, your space. But my mom was already talking over him, asking if I was sure, saying it would just be for a few months, maybe 6 at most, just until they got back on their feet. She promised she'd help around the house, do all the cooking and cleaning, make it worth my while. My dad finally nodded and said they'd contribute to expenses, help with bills, be good housemates. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and I saw something in his eyes that I interpreted as gratitude, but might have been something else entirely. We'll only stay until we can afford something better, he said. I promise we won't overstay our welcome. I should have gotten that in writing. I should have set boundaries. I should have established a timeline with actual dates. But I was 24 and optimistic and genuinely wanted to help my parents. So I just smiled and said, "Of course I'm sure. You're my parents. We're family." Famous last words. They moved in 2 weeks later. My mom brought her plants and her collection of ceramic angels. My dad brought his tools and a bunch of boxes I never saw him open. They took the bedroom at the end of the hall, the one with the best natural light. My mom did start helping around the house, She cooked dinner every night, kept everything spotless, did laundry without being asked. My dad mowed the lawn and fixed a loose railing on the porch. For the first few months, it felt good. It felt right. There was something comforting about coming home to a house that felt lived in. My mom would wait up for me when I worked late, would have leftovers warming in the oven. My dad would help me with home improvement projects on weekends. For those first 6 months, I congratulated myself on making a good decision. But the 6-month mark came and went with no mention of them moving out. Then it was a year. My dad was still working construction, bringing home paychecks that varied wildly. Some months he'd hand me $300, some months nothing. The temporary arrangement didn't have an end date. Not really. My mom would mention finding their own place, but it was always vague. Once we save a little more, she'd say. After the holidays. When the market settles down. My dad never brought it up at all. But here's the thing about temporary arrangements that don't have boundaries. They become permanent without anyone actually deciding that's what they want. My dad did contribute to expenses at first. He'd hand me some cash every month, never quite enough to cover utilities and food, but something. My mom never gave me money directly, but she'd buy groceries sometimes and insisted that counted. I was making decent money by then, working as a project coordinator at a small tech company, so I told myself it was fine. The years passed faster than I expected. I was 25, then 26, then 27. I dated a few people, but nothing serious. It's hard to bring someone home when your parents are there watching television in the living room at 9 on a Friday night. One guy I dated for a few months called it quits after the 5th time he came over, and my dad cornered him with questions. Another just slowly stopped calling. My friends started buying their own places, getting married, having kids. I was still living with my parents, except it was my house and I was the one paying for everything. They'd invite me to housewarming parties and engagement celebrations, and I'd show up with a smile and pretend everything was fine. By the time I was 30, the reality had fully settled in. My dad's contributions had gradually decreased until they stopped altogether. He always had an excuse. Work was slow. The truck needed repairs. He'd had to help out his brother. My mom would look embarrassed when he made these excuses, but she never contradicted him. I started resenting little things. The way my dad would leave his work boots in the middle of the hallway. How my mom would rearrange my kitchen cabinets without asking. The fact that I couldn't walk around in my underwear in my own house. The way they'd have the television on full volume until midnight. I felt guilty for resenting them, which made me resent them more. When I was 32, 8 years after I'd bought the house, I calculated how much money I'd spent supporting all 3 of us. I sat down one Sunday with 8 years of bank statements and a spreadsheet. The number made me physically sick. $87,000. I could have traveled the world. I could have invested that money. I could have had a different life. But I didn't say anything, because they were my parents, and what kind of daughter throws her parents out? That's what I told myself. That's what kept me silent for longer than I should have been. That's what my dad was counting on. The first time my dad asked for money, I didn't think much of it. It was a Thursday evening, and I was making myself a sandwich in the kitchen when he came in looking sheepish. He did this thing where he'd hover near the doorway instead of just coming in and sitting down, like he was preparing for a quick escape. "Can I talk to you about something?" he asked. I knew immediately it was about money. Parents don't use that tone unless they want something. That careful, apologetic tone that's really just the warm-up to a request. But I said, "Sure, what's up?" and kept making my sandwich like this was just a normal conversation. He launched into this explanation about how my mom needed medication for her blood pressure, how the doctor had prescribed something new and the pharmacy wanted $200 for it, how insurance wasn't covering it for some bureaucratic reason he didn't fully understand. He said he wouldn't ask if it wasn't important, if it wasn't for my mom's health. He looked genuinely worried, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes not quite meeting mine. $200. That was it. And it was for my mom's medication, so of course I said yes. What kind of daughter refuses to help with her mother's medicine? I went to my room, got my wallet, and handed him the cash. He thanked me profusely, promised he'd pay me back as soon as work picked up, said I was saving my mom's life. I felt good about it, actually. Felt like I was being a good daughter, taking care of my parents when they needed help. My mom never mentioned the new medication, but I figured she was just being private about her health issues. Some people don't like to broadcast their medical problems. I didn't push it. I didn't ask to see the prescription bottle. I didn't verify anything because I trusted him, and because the idea that he'd lie about my mom's health seemed impossible. That was the test run. He was seeing if I'd say yes, if I'd ask questions, if I'd demand to see receipts or prescriptions. I failed that test by passing it. I showed him I was an easy mark. The second time was about 4 months later. This time he came to me on a Saturday morning while my mom was at the grocery store. He looked more stressed, more desperate. The timing of it, waiting until my mom was gone, should have been a red flag. But I was still operating under the assumption that my father was a fundamentally honest person who would only ask for help if he really needed it. He said his truck was making a terrible noise, that the mechanic had looked at it and said the transmission was going, that it would cost at least $800 to fix. He needed his truck for work. Without the truck, he couldn't work. Without work, he couldn't contribute to the household. See how he did that? Made it about me, about the household, about how this would benefit everyone. If he had a working truck, he could take on more jobs. He could finally start paying me back for everything I'd been doing for them. $800 was harder to swallow. That was a significant chunk of my savings. I'd been putting away money for a potential vacation, the first real one I'd allowed myself to plan since buying the house. I'd been looking at flights to somewhere warm, somewhere I could lie on a beach and forget about mortgages and responsibilities for a week. But he was right, in a way. He did need his truck for work, and if he couldn't work, that would mean even less money coming in, which meant I'd be supporting them even more completely. So I transferred the money to his account, telling myself this was an investment in future contributions. This was temporary help that would pay off when he got back on his feet. I was being smart, not stupid. I was thinking long-term. He didn't pay me back. When I brought it up casually a few months later, just mentioned something about the truck and how it was running, he got defensive, said he was struggling, that I didn't understand how hard it was for men his age to find consistent work, that younger guys were always getting priority, that the jobs weren't there like they used to be, that he was doing his best. My mom was right there, and she gave me this look, this pleading look that said, "Don't push this." So I didn't. The requests became more frequent after that. Never huge amounts at once, but they added up. $300 for something related to the truck again, some sensor that needed replacing, $150 for some tools he needed for a specific job, specialty equipment that the company wouldn't provide, $250 because he'd apparently lent money to a friend who was in trouble, and now my dad was short on cash and could I help him out just this once. Each time there was a story. Each time it was urgent. Each time it was going to be the last time. And each time I told myself I was helping my father maintain his dignity, helping him keep working, helping him stay independent. I didn't want to be the kind of daughter who nickel and dimed her parents, who made them beg for basic necessities, who kept a ledger of who owed what to whom. But I was keeping a mental ledger, even if I didn't want to admit it. And the numbers kept growing. Then the amounts started getting bigger and the stories got vaguer. He came to me with an opportunity, he said. A buddy of his from work had a business idea. Something about flipping houses or buying equipment to rent out to contractors or maybe investing in a food truck. The details kept changing. He needed $2,000 to invest, and he'd double it in 6 months, guaranteed. Then he'd pay me back everything he owed plus interest. He'd finally be in a position to help me instead of always being helped. The way he said it, like he was embarrassed about always being on the receiving end. Like this hurt him more than it hurt me. Like he was the victim of circumstances beyond his control, and I was his only hope. I said no at first. $2,000 was insane. That wasn't helping with an emergency. And that was becoming a financial backer for a business venture I knew nothing about. I asked questions. What exactly was the business? Who was this friend? What was the timeline? Could I see a business plan? But my dad didn't have good answers. Everything was vague, trust-based, all happening on handshakes and verbal agreements. The friend was someone from work. I'd met him once or twice, nice guy, trustworthy. The business would start making money within a few months, definitely within 6. The details weren't finalized yet, but the opportunity wouldn't wait. Someone else would snatch it up if we didn't move fast. He kept bringing it up. Kept talking about how this was his chance to finally get ahead, to be able to contribute properly, to maybe even help me out for once instead of being a burden. That word, burden, he used it like a knife. Like he knew exactly how I felt and was using it against me. Like if I said no, I was confirming that yes, he was a burden. And what kind of daughter makes her father feel that way? I gave him the money. I'm not proud of it, but I did. I transferred $2,000 from my savings account to his checking account and tried not to think about all the things I could have done with that money, the vacation I wasn't taking, the car repairs I'd been putting off, the emergency fund that was supposed to be for my emergencies, not his business ventures. And surprise, surprise, I never saw a penny back. When I asked about it after 6 months had passed, he said the deal had fallen through, that his friend had screwed him over, that he was as much a victim as I was. He actually said that he was a victim. Like I wasn't the one who was out $2,000. Like I wasn't the one who'd been stupid enough to hand over that much money based on nothing but a vague promise and a father's manipulation. By this point, I'd given him close to $5,000 in direct loans over a couple of years, money that disappeared into whatever black hole he was putting it into. And that didn't even count the $87,000 I'd spent housing and feeding them over 8 years. But the $5,000 in cash loans hurt differently, because those had been specific asks, specific lies, specific betrayals. And I still didn't know what he was really spending it on. I told myself it was probably gambling, or maybe he had some kind of debt I didn't know about. Maybe loan sharks or credit cards run up to their limit. I actually hoped it was something like that. Something stupid but explainable. Something that would make sense of why he needed so much money so often. The worst part was my mom. She knew he was asking me for money. She had to know. But she never said anything about it. She'd just get quieter when he made his requests, would find reasons to leave the room. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with this expression I couldn't read. Guilt? Pity? Fear? I wanted to ask her about it, wanted to pull her aside and demand to know what was going on, but I never did, because I was afraid of what she might tell me, afraid that the answer would be worse than not knowing. I started keeping track of my finances more carefully. I noticed patterns in my spending that I'd been too busy or too willfully blind to see before. Large cash withdrawals that corresponded with my dad's requests. My savings account that had been growing steadily until about 2 years ago, when it had flatlined and then started declining. I was 32 years old, and I had less money saved than I'd had at 28. I was moving backwards financially. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a while, but I didn't know what, and I was afraid to dig deeper because I knew that once I started pulling that thread, everything would unravel. The changes in my dad's behavior were subtle at first, the kind of thing you notice in retrospect but don't register in the moment. He was around less. He'd always had irregular work hours because of construction, but this was different. He'd leave early in the morning and sometimes not come back until late at night. When I asked about work, he'd give vague answers. Big project across town, overtime, weekend shift, commercial building that had to be done quickly. They were shorthanded and he was picking up extra hours. The stories were always plausible. I worked in an office where schedules were predictable and shifts were the same every week. I didn't understand construction work. For all I knew, this was completely normal. People who worked with their hands probably had irregular schedules, long days, unexpected overtime. I had no reason to question it except for this growing feeling in my gut that something was off. My mom stopped asking where he was. That's what I noticed most. She'd always been the one to track his schedule, to know when he'd be home, to have dinner ready at the right time. She'd call him if he was late, ask if he was okay, check on him. But she stopped. She'd make dinner for the two of us, and we'd eat in silence, and she'd put his plate in the refrigerator without comment, without even asking when he'd be home. I started paying attention to the little things. The way she'd flinch slightly when his truck pulled into the driveway. How she'd excuse herself to their bedroom when he came home, saying she was tired or had a headache or just needed to lie down. The fact that they barely spoke to each other anymore, and when they did, it was purely functional. The water bill came. We need more coffee. Can you pick up my prescription? That sort of thing. No warmth, no affection, just two people existing in the same space with nothing connecting them. One evening, about 3 months before everything exploded, I did something I'm not proud of. My dad said he had to work late, and after he left, I called his company. I'd never done that before. I trusted him, or I wanted to trust him, so I'd never felt the need to verify his stories. I'd taken him at his word because he was my father, and fathers don't lie to their children about basic things like where they are and what they're doing. But something was eating at me, this feeling in my gut that wouldn't go away, this sense that I was being lied to on a scale I couldn't comprehend. So I looked up the number for his construction company, the one he'd been working for on and off for years, and I called. The dispatcher who answered was friendly enough. I said I was his daughter and I needed to reach him about a family emergency. Nothing serious, but he needed to call me. The pause that followed was long enough to make my heart start racing. "Ma'am," the dispatcher said carefully, like she was choosing her words very precisely, "your father isn't scheduled today. He's been on the day shift this week, 9 to 5. He left here around 5:15. It was 7:30. I thanked her and hung up. Sat there in the kitchen with the phone in my hand, trying to process what this meant. He'd lied about working late. He'd been lying about work in general, probably for months, maybe years. Where was he going? What was he doing for those extra hours? And why did he need to lie about it? I called his number twice. Both times it went straight to voicemail, that generic message that meant he'd turned off his phone deliberately. He came home after 11 that night. I was still up, sitting in the living room in the dark like some kind of detective in a bad movie, waiting to confront him. When he walked in and saw me there, just a silhouette on the couch, he jumped. "Jesus, you scared me," he said, putting his hand on his chest. "Why are you sitting in the dark? Where were you?" "Work. I told you. We had to finish this." "I called your work. They said you left at 5:15. The look on his face. I'd never forget it. First confusion, like he couldn't understand what I was saying. Then panic, raw and undisguised. Then this cold calculation as he figured out what to say, what story would work, what lie would get him out of this. I watched him go through all 3 stages in the span of about 5 seconds. He went with offense as defense, which should tell you everything you need to know about his character. "You're checking up on me now? Calling my work? Verifying my schedule? I'm a grown man. I'm your father. I don't need to report my every move to you. This is exactly why I needed some space. You lied to me." "Where were you?" "I stopped for a drink with some guys from work." "Is that a crime? Am I not allowed to have a life? To decompress after a hard day? I'm sorry if I need an hour or 2 to myself before coming home to this interrogation." I didn't believe him, but I also didn't have proof of anything else. What was I going to do? Follow him? Install a tracking app on his phone? Hire a private investigator? It all seemed so dramatic, so paranoid. Maybe he really had just gone for drinks. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe this was what happened when you lived with your parents as an adult. You started treating them like children who needed surveillance and accountability. I was exhausted, and the fight went out of me as quickly as it had come. "Fine," I said. "I'm going to bed." But I wasn't fine, and things weren't fine, and I'd just let him know that I was starting to pay attention, which meant he'd have to be more careful. I'd tipped my hand without gaining any useful information, and I knew he'd use that against me somehow. I started noticing more after that. The way he was particular about his phone, never leaving it unattended, always taking it to the bathroom with him, sleeping with it on his nightstand and waking up if it buzzed, how he'd started dressing better on work days, wearing cologne I'd never smelled before, taking extra time with his appearance. These weren't the actions of a man who spent his days on construction sites. These were the actions of someone who was meeting people who mattered to him, someone he wanted to impress. The fact that his paychecks, the ones he occasionally showed me as proof he was working, didn't match up with the hours he claimed to be putting in. If he was working overtime multiple nights a week, the paychecks should have been bigger. But they weren't. They were average, sometimes even below average, which meant either he wasn't working the hours he claimed, or he was getting paid cash under the table and hiding it from me. Either option was bad. My mom knew something. I became certain of that. I'd find her just sitting sometimes, staring at nothing, and when I'd ask if she was okay, she'd startle like I'd woken her from a nightmare, like she'd been somewhere else entirely, somewhere dark and frightening. She started having trouble sleeping. I'd hear her moving around the house at 3, 4 in the morning. The creak of floorboards, the sound of cabinets opening and closing, water running in the sink. One time I got up to check on her and found her in the kitchen, just standing there in the dark, crying silently. Not sobbing, just tears running down her face while she stood perfectly still, like she'd forgotten how to move or had given up on the idea of movement entirely. "Mom," I said softly, not wanting to scare her. "What's wrong?" She wiped her face quickly, tried to smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just couldn't sleep. You know how it is when you get older. Your mind keeps working even when your body is tired. Is it Dad? Is something going on with Dad?" The question hung there between us. She could have told me then. She could have saved us all a lot of pain, could have warned me about what was coming, could have prepared me in some way. But instead, she just shook her head and said, "Everything's fine. Go back to bed. You need your sleep for work." Everything was not fine. My dad's absences became more frequent. Whole weekends would go by when I'd barely see him. He always had explanations, always had somewhere he needed to be. A buddy who needed help moving, a side job that paid cash, a family obligation on his side that my mom and I weren't invited to, which I found odd but didn't question. My mom's sadness deepened into something that looked like clinical depression. She stopped taking care of herself the way she used to, stopped styling her hair, wearing makeup, putting on nice clothes. She'd wear the same sweatpants and t-shirt multiple days in a row. And when I'd suggest she shower or get dressed, She'd just nod and then not do it. The house, which had always been spotless because of her obsessive cleaning, started showing signs of neglect. Dust accumulating in corners, dishes in the sink overnight, laundry piling up. These were small things, but they were huge for my mom, who'd always prided herself on keeping an immaculate home. She was falling apart, and I didn't know how to help her because she wouldn't tell me what was wrong. I should have confronted them both, should have demanded answers, should have done something other than watch my family slowly disintegrate in front of my eyes. But I was paralyzed by fear of what I might discover, fear that asking the questions would make whatever was happening real in a way I couldn't take back, fear that I'd lose whatever was left of my family if I pushed too hard. Then my dad did something that, in retrospect, was the most audacious thing he'd ever done. He announced we were going to have a family party, a celebration for his birthday. His birthday is in September, and he brought this up in early August. Told us over dinner one night, speaking mostly to me because my mom was barely eating, just pushing food around her plate. He said he wanted to do something special this year, that it had been too long since we'd had a real celebration. He wanted to have people over, maybe do a barbecue, make it a whole thing. My mom's fork clattered onto her plate. She stared at him with an expression I'd never seen before. Not quite horror, but close. "That's not a good idea," she said quietly. "Why not? It'll be fun. We could use some fun around here, don't you think?" He looked at me, smiling. "What do you say? It's your house, so it's your call. But I think it would be nice." "Who would you invite?" my mom asked. Her voice was strained. "Some people from work? Maybe a few old friends? Nothing crazy." "No," my mom said. "Please, let's not do this." The pleading in her voice made my skin crawl. She knew something about this party, about these people he wanted to invite. But my dad just laughed it off, said she was being dramatic, that she always got weird about social gatherings. I should have listened to my mom, should have picked up on the desperation in her voice. But I didn't. I said sure, we could have a party. It was his birthday, after all. How bad could it be? The next 3 weeks were tense. My dad was almost manic about the party planning. He wanted to make sure I'd be home that day, kept asking me to confirm I didn't have any other plans. My mom got quieter and quieter. I'd catch her looking at the calendar with this stricken expression. A few times she started to say something to me, but then she'd stop herself, like she'd changed her mind. The week before the party, she tried one more time to stop it. I was in the kitchen making coffee when she came in. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Please," she said, "tell him you changed your mind about the party. Say something came up. Say anything." "Mom, what's going on? Why don't you want him to have a birthday party?" She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I watched her struggle with something, some decision about whether to tell me whatever she knew. In the end, she just shook her head. "Nothing, never mind. I'm just being silly." But she wasn't being silly. She was being terrified. The morning of the party, my mom was up at dawn. I heard her in the kitchen, the sounds of pots and pans, running water. When I came out around 7, she'd already made enough food for 20 people. Potato salad, coleslaw, pasta salad, a tray of brownies. Her hands were shaking as she worked. "Mom, you didn't have to make all this." "It's fine." I wanted to. Her voice was flat, emotionless. My dad was in an unusually good mood. He was whistling while he set up chairs in the backyard, checking his phone constantly. Every time a text came in, he'd smile. It should have been nice, seeing him happy. Instead, it felt wrong, performative. The guests were supposed to arrive at 2 in the afternoon. At 1:45, I was in my room getting dressed when I heard my mom crying. Not quiet crying. Deep, broken sobs that sounded like they were being torn from her chest. I rushed to her bedroom. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in her pajamas, her face in her hands. "Mom, what is it? Are you sick? Should I call someone?" She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what?" "Mom, you're scaring me." Before she could answer, we heard a car pulling up outside. Then another. My dad's voice, loud and cheerful, greeting someone. My mom's whole body went rigid. "I can't do this," she said. "I can't watch this happen." "Watch what happened?" But she just stood up, moving like someone in a trance, and walked past me toward the living room. I followed her, completely lost, my anxiety climbing with each step. We got to the living room just as my dad was opening the front door. A woman stood there, attractive, maybe in her mid-40s. And behind her, 3 kids. A teenager, maybe 16 or 17, and 2 younger ones, probably around 10 and 8. 3 kids. Not one, not two. 3 whole human beings he'd created and raised in secret. 3 children who had birthdays and report cards and soccer games and Christmas mornings. 3 lives built on my money while I worked myself into exhaustion paying for his lies. I looked at my mom. She was staring at them with absolute resignation, like she was watching her own execution and had already accepted it. My dad, smiling broadly, gestured for them to come in, and then he said the words that would destroy everything we'd ever been. Everyone, I want you to meet my other family. The world tilted. I actually felt dizzy, like the floor had dropped away beneath me. Other family. Other family. The woman looked uncomfortable, glancing between my mom and me. The kids looked confused. The teenager was staring at her phone like she wished she was anywhere else. This is my wife, my dad said, gesturing to the woman. Not my other wife. My wife. Like my mom didn't exist. And these are our kids. This is their home too now. I wanted everyone to finally meet. My mom made a sound, a small gasp, and then her knees buckled. I caught her before she hit the ground. Barely. She was conscious but limp in my arms, her eyes rolling back. Mom! Mom, stay with me! The woman, this other wife, took a step forward. Oh my God, is she okay? Should we call someone? My dad didn't move to help. He just stood there, looking annoyed that his big reveal wasn't going the way he'd planned. I half-carried, half-dragged my mom to the couch. Her eyes focused on me, and I saw in them everything she'd been holding back. She'd known. Of course she'd known. Maybe not all the details, maybe not for the whole 10 years, but she'd known something was terribly wrong and she'd been too afraid to face it. The woman was talking to my dad in a low, urgent voice. I caught fragments. You said you were divorced? You said they knew. You said this would be okay. I looked at the kids. The teenager was backing toward the door. The younger 2 were holding hands, looking scared. They were victims in this too, I realized. Whatever my dad had told their mother, whatever lies he'd spun to create this second family, these kids had no idea what they were walking into. And the logistics of it. How had he done it? How had he kept track of which lies he told to whom? Which birthday parties to attend? Which school events? Which family dinners? He must have had calendars, schedules, entire systems to keep his 2 lives separate. The mental energy alone must have been exhausting, and he'd chosen to invest that energy into deception instead of just being honest with anyone. I stood up. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. Get out! My dad turned to me. Now, let's just calm down and... Get out! The woman grabbed her kids and started pushing them toward the door. We're leaving. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Wait, my dad said, reaching for her. Just wait a minute. This is just shock. They'll understand once. How long? I asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was cold and hard and completely calm. How long have you been lying to me? He had the decency to at least look ashamed. It's complicated. How? Long. 10 years. 10 years. A decade. While I'd been working myself to death, buying a house, inviting him to live with me, supporting him financially, he'd been building an entire separate life, an entire separate family. Everything clicked into place. The money. All that money I'd given him over the years. It hadn't been for medication or truck repairs or business opportunities. It had been for them, for this other family. I'd been funding my father's double life without even knowing it. The money, I said. All the money I gave you. It was for them, wasn't it? He didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it. The truth was written all over his face. My mom had pulled herself up on the couch. She was staring at my dad with an expression of absolute loathing. I'd never seen her look at anyone like that before. Tell her, my mom said. Her voice was stronger now, like fainting had somehow given her the strength she'd been missing. Tell her everything. Tell her how you've been living 2 lives, playing house with your mistress while your real family paid for everything. Tell her how you've been stealing from your own daughter to support your affair. Tell her the truth for once in your miserable life. The woman at the door went pale. Mistress? Affair? You said you were divorced 10 years ago? You said your ex-wife wouldn't even talk to you. I never divorced her, my mom said, looking at the woman directly. I'm still his wife. Have been for 35 years. Oh my God, the woman whispered. She looked at my dad with horror. You lied to me. All this time, you lied to me. It's not like that, my dad started. But she cut him off. You told me your daughter lived with her mother. You said you paid child support. You said you saw her sometimes, but that it was complicated because of the divorce. I do have a daughter, he said weakly, gesturing at me. Who owns this house? I shouted. This house that you've been living in for free for 8 years while you supported your second family with money you stole from me. The pieces kept falling into place. Every lie, every manipulation, every time he'd made me feel guilty for asking him to contribute or questioning where he'd been. He'd been systematically using both families, playing us against each other without us even knowing the other existed. You're a monster, my mom said. She was standing now. She was standing, steady on her feet. An absolute monster. I knew something was wrong. I knew for years. But I never imagined it was this. You knew? I turned to her. You knew, and you didn't tell me? I suspected. I didn't have proof, and I was too afraid to look for it because I knew that if I found it, everything would fall apart. So I just pretended. I pretended everything was fine. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She started crying again, but these were different tears. Not defeated tears. Angry tears. My dad tried to take control of the situation. Look, I know this is a shock, but we're all adults here. We can work this out. There's no reason we can't all be civil about this. Civil? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to be civil? You've been lying to me for a decade. You've stolen thousands of dollars from me. You've destroyed our family. And you want me to be civil? This is my home too. You invited me here. This is my home. My name is on the deed. My money pays for everything. You're just a parasite who's been bleeding me dry for years. He stepped toward me, his face hardening. That's no way to talk to your father. My father? I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. My father wouldn't have done any of this. I don't know who you are, but you're not my father. The woman at the door spoke up. We're leaving. Kid's car now. Wait, my dad said desperately. Just wait. We can fix this. Fix this? The woman looked at him like he was insane. You've been lying to me for 10 years. Our entire relationship is a lie. You have another family, another wife. You're not who I thought you were. You're not who you told me you were. I love you, he said to her, which was maybe the most devastating thing he could have said in that moment. My mom made a wounded noise. No, the woman said firmly. You don't love anyone but yourself. And I'm not staying around to watch whatever mess you've created here. Come on, kids. She herded them out the door. The teenager looked back once, and our eyes met. I saw pity there, and something like understanding. She'd been dragged into this mess, too. The door closed behind them. The three of us stood in the living room, the ruins of my dad's carefully planned reveal scattered around us, the food my mom had made, the chairs in the backyard, the decorations I hadn't even noticed before, like he'd planned to make this a celebration. You need to leave, I said to my dad. Right now. Get your things and get out of my house. You can't just throw me out. I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy everything. You're my daughter. You have a responsibility. I have a responsibility? I felt something snap inside me. All the years of swallowing my resentment, of feeling guilty for not doing enough, of sacrificing my own life to help him. I bought this house with my money. I let you live here rent-free. I've been supporting you for 8 years. I gave you thousands of dollars you'll never pay back. I have met every responsibility a daughter could have and more. The only person who hasn't met their responsibilities here is you. My mom was nodding. She's right. You need to leave. I can't even look at you right now. Oh, so now you're taking her side? This is rich. You who barely did anything around here, who just cooked some meals and thought that was enough? I did everything, my mom said, her voice shaking with rage. I took care of this house. I took care of you, and I've been dying inside for years while you lived your double life. Don't you dare minimize what I've done. He turned to her, and for the first time, I saw real anger in his face. Not frustration, not irritation, rage. You want to know why I had another family? Because you're boring. Because you've been boring for 20 years. You're not interesting, you're not fun, you're not anything. She made me feel alive. My mom slapped him. Not a theatrical movie slap, but a real one. The kind that snaps your head to the side and leaves a mark. He stumbled back, his hand on his cheek, shock replacing the anger. Get out, my mom said. Get out before I do worse than that. He looked between us, seemed to realize he'd lost, and headed for the bedroom. We heard him moving around, drawers opening and closing. He came back 15 minutes later with a duffel bag and a garbage bag full of stuff. At the door, he turned back one last time. You're going to regret this, both of you. You think you can just cut me out? But I'm your father. I'm your husband. You'll come crawling back. No, I said simply. We won't. He left. We listened to his truck start, listened to him back out of the driveway, listened to the sound of the engine fading into the distance. Then my mom and I just stood there in the ruins of what had been our family, and neither of us knew what to say. After what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, my mom walked slowly to the couch and sat down. She looked smaller somehow, like she'd physically shrunk. I sat next to her, not touching, both of us staring at nothing. I should have told you, she finally said, when I first started suspecting. Why didn't you? She was quiet for a long time. Because I was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean. Afraid of having to leave. Of starting over with no job, no money, nowhere to go. And maybe afraid that if I looked too closely, I'd have to admit my entire marriage was a lie. When did you start suspecting? About 6 years ago. He started being gone more, being secretive. The phone calls in the other room, the way he'd come home smelling like perfume. I'd ask, and he'd gaslight me, tell me I was imagining things, being paranoid. She laughed bitterly. I let him convince me I was the problem. We sat in silence. The food my mom had made was still in the kitchen. The chairs were still set up outside. The money, I said. All the money he borrowed from me. It was for them, wasn't it? Probably. I didn't know he was taking money from you. He told me work was slow, that he was barely getting by. Thousands of dollars. Over the years, thousands. She covered her face with her hands. I'm so sorry. Don't. It's not your fault. It's his fault. All of it. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. He told me he was divorced. I had no idea. I'm leaving him. It was from her. The other woman. I showed the text to my mom. At least she has some decency, my mom said. What are you going to do? Divorce him, obviously. But beyond that? I'm 60 years old. I haven't worked a real job in decades. I don't have any savings. You can stay here, as long as you need. I can't keep mooching off you. You're not him. You actually help around here. And honestly, after what we just went through, I could use the company. She started crying again, reaching for my hand. I'm so sorry, for all of it. We protected each other, I said. In the end, that's what matters. The next few days were brutal. My dad called and texted constantly from numbers I didn't recognize. At first apologetic, then angry, then desperate, then threatening. I blocked every number. He'd call from a different one. My mom got the same treatment. She blocked him as well. He showed up at the house once, banging on the door at 10 at night. My mom called the police. They made him leave and told him if he came back, they'd arrest him. He screamed at us from the street, said things I'd never heard him say before. After the police escorted him away, my mom and I sat in the locked house with all the lights off, holding each other. I never knew he had that in him, my mom whispered. That rage. He's losing control. He thought we'd fall apart without him. The doorbell rang. We both jumped. But it was just a delivery. We laughed at ourselves, but it wasn't really funny. I started digging into our finances more seriously. I pulled up every bank statement from the past 8 years, highlighted every cash withdrawal, every transfer, every expense that I couldn't account for. The total was staggering, close to $9,000 in direct requests. But beyond that, there were all the household expenses I'd covered alone for years. Mortgage payments, utilities, property taxes, groceries for 3 people when only one person was contributing, insurance, repairs. If I factored all of that in, I'd probably spent over $100,000 supporting him. $100,000 for someone who was using me to fund his affair? I showed my mom the numbers. She got physically sick, had to run to the bathroom. When she came back, she looked gray. I worked cleaning houses for years, she said. When you were little, I'd work all day and come home exhausted and still have to take care of you and cook dinner and clean our own place. I saved every penny I could. When your father and I got married, I had about $12,000 saved. I gave it all to him to invest, to help us build a future. She laughed, a hollow sound. I wonder if he spent that on his other woman too. Probably. I have nothing, literally nothing. No savings, no credit in my name, no work history for the past 10 years. I'm completely dependent on you now, and I hate it. We'll figure it out. You can get a job, start building your own credit, file for divorce, and maybe get some kind of spousal support. Spousal support from a man who works construction and probably has no assets? I'll be lucky if I get $50 a month. But she was already looking different, less defeated. There was a spark of something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Anger, maybe, or determination. I'm going to call a lawyer tomorrow, she said. A good one. I'm going to take him for everything he's worth. Which isn't much, but it's the principle of the thing. Good. And I'm going to get a job. Any job. I don't care if I'm bagging groceries or cleaning toilets. I'm going to support myself. I'm going to prove that I don't need him. You never needed him. I thought I did. That was the problem. He convinced me I couldn't make it on my own, that I was too old, too unskilled, too whatever. But you know what? I'm 60 years old and I'm done being scared. We sat up talking until 3 in the morning, making plans, discussing options, trying to figure out how to rebuild our lives. It felt good, having a plan, having a purpose beyond just surviving. The harassment from my dad continued for about 2 weeks before it finally stopped. I found out later through mutual connections that the other woman had not only left him, but had filed for custody of their kids with a request that he have only supervised visitation. Apparently, she was terrified he'd been lying to her about other things too, and she didn't trust him alone with the children. He'd lost both families in one day. By trying to have everything, he'd ended up with nothing. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like justice had been served. But mostly I just felt tired and sad. Sad for the father I thought I had, who'd never actually existed. Sad for my mom, who'd wasted decades on someone who didn't value her. Sad for those kids who were innocent victims in all of this. My mom got a lawyer. The divorce proceedings started. Because they'd been married so long and my mom had no income, she was entitled to spousal support, though it wasn't much. The lawyer also went after him for the money he'd taken from me, classifying it as fraud. We'd probably never see most of it back, but the lawyer said there was a chance we could get a judgment against him. More importantly, my mom got a job. Just part-time at first, working at a local bakery. She came home after her first day with flour in her hair and a tired smile on her face. It felt good, she said. Earning my own money, being out in the world, talking to people who don't know anything about our mess. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me too, for the first time in a long time. We started going to therapy, both individually and together. Turned out we both had a lot to process. My therapist talked about codependency, about how I'd taken on a caretaker role that wasn't healthy, about boundaries. The first few sessions, I just cried. Couldn't even form words, just sat there sobbing while this patient woman handed me tissues and waited. When I could finally talk, I kept saying, "How did I not see it? How was I so stupid?" And my therapist would gently correct me. "You weren't stupid. You were trusting. Those are different things." And he exploited that trust systematically. My mom's therapist focused on her lost sense of self, on rebuilding her identity outside of being someone's wife. She told me once, after one of her sessions, the therapist asked me what I liked to do, and I couldn't answer. I've spent so long being his wife that I don't know who I am without that. It broke my heart. The house felt different without him in it. Lighter. My mom reorganized his old bedroom into a craft room. She'd always wanted to get into quilting, she said, but had never had the time or space. Now she had both. I started dating someone seriously for the first time in years. Someone I'd met at work who knew nothing about my family drama and saw me as just me. It was refreshing. It was freeing. His name doesn't matter. But what matters is that on our third date, I told him everything. Just blurted it out over dinner because I couldn't stand the idea of building something on anything less than complete honesty. I watched his face as I talked about my dad's double life, about the money, about the devastation. I waited for him to make an excuse and leave. Instead, he reached across the table and took my hand. "That sounds incredibly hard," he said. "Thank you for trusting me with it." No judgment. No shock value questions, just acceptance. I almost cried right there in the restaurant. About 8 months after everything had happened, I ran into someone from my dad's old construction crew at the grocery store. We made awkward small talk, and then he said something that made everything feel worth it. "Your dad's living in a room above a gas station now, working there part-time. His girlfriend left him high and dry, took the kids and moved 2 states away. Heard he's pretty bitter about it." I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt like he got what he deserved. But I just felt hollow. This man who'd hurt us so badly was now alone and struggling. And I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, not anything. "That's too bad," I said, which was the most neutral thing I could think of. At home, I told my mom what I'd heard. She was working on a quilt, her fingers moving carefully through the fabric. "Good," she said simply. Then, "No, not good. I don't wish him harm, but I don't wish him well either. I'm just indifferent. Is that wrong?" "I don't think so. I think it means we're healing. I think you're right. The divorce was finalized a year after that party. My mom was legally free. We had a small celebration, just the two of us, with champagne and takeout pizza. She'd gotten promoted at the bakery, was working full-time now. She'd started her own bank account, her own credit card. She was rebuilding herself piece by piece. The day the divorce papers came through, she sat at my kitchen table and just stared at them for a long time. 35 years, she said quietly. 35 years of my life, reduced to 6 pages of legal jargon. Then she looked up at me with the clearest eyes I'd seen in months. But you know what? I'd rather have 6 pages of freedom than 35 more years of lies. I calculated that she'd been contributing to household expenses for about 6 months now. Not a lot, but enough to be meaningful. Enough to be partnership rather than dependency. I'm going to start looking for my own place, she told me one evening. Nothing fancy, just a little apartment. Somewhere that's mine. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. I love you, and I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I need my own space. I need to prove to myself that I can make it on my own. I understand. And you need your space too. You're 33 years old. You should be able to have your life without your mom around. We laughed. She was right. She found a place 3 months later. A 1-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood. Close enough that we could still see each other regularly, but far enough that we both had our own lives. I helped her move in, and we stood in her empty living room together. How does it feel? I asked. Terrifying, she said. And wonderful. I still see my mom a few times a week. We have dinner together, go to movies, talk on the phone. But it's different now. We're not 2 people trapped in the same nightmare. We're 2 people who survived something terrible together and came out stronger. My dad tried to reach out a few times over the years. Emails mostly, because I'd blocked every other method of contact. They were rambling messages that swung between self-pity and anger, between apologizing and blaming. I never responded. Eventually, they stopped coming. I heard through the grapevine that he was sick. Some chronic condition that would probably never kill him, but would make his life uncomfortable. Part of me felt like I should care, but I didn't. That connection, the one that had bound us as father and daughter, had been severed so completely that I couldn't summon anything for him anymore. My mom felt the same way. He made his choices, she said when I told her. Now he gets to live with them. That's not our responsibility anymore. It's been several years now since that day. I'm in my late 30s. My mom is in her mid-60s. We've both built new lives, better lives. She has her job, her apartment, her quilting. She's dating someone, a kind man who owns a hardware store and treats her like she's precious. I have my career, my relationship, my house that finally feels like mine again. Sometimes I think about what my dad said, about how we'd regret cutting him out, how we'd come crawling back. But he was wrong about that. Like he was wrong about so many things. We don't regret it. We don't miss him. We barely think about him at all anymore. The money he took is gone, and I'll never get it back. But I got something more valuable. I got my life back. I got my mother back, the person she was supposed to be, before he spent decades grinding her down. I got peace. People ask me sometimes if I've forgiven him. And I have to explain that forgiveness isn't really the right word. I've released him. I've stopped giving him space in my head. I've stopped letting his actions define my worth. That's not forgiveness exactly. It's just refusing to let him matter anymore. My mom and I talk about this sometimes, late at night over tea. We compare notes on who we were before and who we are now. Before, I was so afraid of disappointing people that I sacrificed my own well-being. Before, my mom was so afraid of being alone that she accepted crumbs of affection. Now we both know what we deserve, and we won't settle for less. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my house, I think about those kids, his other children. I hope they're okay. I hope their mother protected them from the worst of his toxicity. I hope they didn't inherit his casual cruelty, his ability to lie without conscience, his talent for making everyone around him feel like they were the problem. I hope they're better than he was. I hope we all are. The house that I bought when I was 24, the house that was supposed to be my fresh start and instead became a trap, finally feels like home. It took a decade and a broken family and thousands of dollars and countless tears, but I reclaimed it. I reclaimed myself. My mom did too. She's not the woman she was when my dad was controlling her life. She's stronger, sharper, more herself. She laughs more. She argues with me sometimes, which she never would have done before, too afraid of conflict. Now she knows she can disagree and still be loved. She knows she can take up space. We both learned that we're more than the roles he assigned us. More than daughter, more than wife, more than sources of money and labor and forgiveness. We're whole people with our own lives, our own choices, our own futures that don't include him in any way that matters. And that's where we are now, living our lives, moving forward, sometimes looking back, but only to remember how far we've come. The past doesn't own us anymore. He doesn't own us anymore. We're free. Finally, completely free.